I am a storyteller, and it is my job to visit different worlds and relay them back to you. Today, I'm going to tell you a story about Jackie. When I got to the world was already undergoing a change. I was told how they used to live deep in the ocean, but the oceans were slowly drying up. They would snorkel under the ground. Algae was a frequent snack. And it was overall a very calm and peaceful world. Most animals in the world could swim in the water and walk on land. And it was utterly beautiful. The colors were bright and vibrant. It was just stunning. When I got there, it was probably like 50% land, 50% water. And it was still, I got to sit on a beach and watch the sunset where the colors were even more vibrant and stunning than the world that we know. I wish I could have taken a picture to show you all because it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And then I met Jackie. Jackie walked up to me while I was watching the sunset and just sat nearby. She told me, "We don't see many like you around here." And I was a little confused by that, because the two of us looked the same. We both looked very human. And while I quickly learned soon after that she was able to go into the water and sort of transform into a almost mermaid type creature. And I obviously couldn't. How did she know that I couldn't transform? Was there something that I was missing? Could they see more than I could? I don't know. But I was very confused and I told her such. "I have no idea what you mean." Her response was almost immediate of, "I saw you come through. You appeared out of thin air. You were slightly wobbly on your legs when you landed, looking around, trying to figure out if you were safe or not. I can tell a fight or flight response, or potential response, when I see one. We don't have much of that here. This world is very peaceful, even though it is changing so quickly." That still confused me, because I thought that when I appeared in worlds, it was fine. I didn't know that there was any sort of indication of the fact that I was a storyteller. But she apparently knew. So after the sunset and the air was cooling off, we got up and walked over to a little hut that was just off the beach. I hadn't noticed it previously. But there were pineapples growing, almost as if lining the path. It was really cute, and she pulled one off as we walked, eating it like it was a carrot almost. She held the part that comes out, the leaves. I don't really know the parts of a pineapple, and she just chomped in, which okay. And we went in and we sat down and we talked all into the night. That is when I learned that her name was Jackie. I learned about how, while the water was receding, it was not a worry. It was something that they knew was happening and going to happen, apparently for forever. They showed me one of their sacred texts and translated it for me, because it was not in a language that I knew, recognized, or anything. The words, the writing looked like symbols to me. Obviously that wasn't my language. But she told me how they knew ever since the beginning of their time that one day the water was going to recede and everything was going to change. And supposedly they were supposed to then be able to swim in the air like they do in the water. That's how the book described it. I'm assuming levitation or possibly growing wings, like a sort of transformation like they have with the water, but who knows? I didn't get to see it, and I wasn't supposed to, I don't think. I think that's a story for another storyteller. What I did start to learn is how, while they knew that the water receding was going to happen, this world had always been a peaceful place, and it was starting to change. Owls were a new creature for them, or at least what I know to be owls. I'm sure it was not the exact same. But she pointed out the window as what looked like an owl turned its head to have these sort of glowing eyes that felt like they pierced my soul. It was very uncomfortable. And when the owl got up and flew away eventually, there was this sort of goo that was left behind on the branch of the tree it was sitting on that was like dripping down. And she told me how they didn't really know what it was. When creatures, animals, anything decomposes in their world, it does turn to a goo. But why would a live owl, first off, have glowing eyes? She didn't know the answer to that one either. But then be leaving behind a goo while it was still living. She explained how this was something that was starting to happen with smaller creatures. And their scientist looked at the compound of the goo, compared it to the decomposing goo, all of that, and it was the same. So why was a living creature actively decomposing, supposedly? It was very uncomfortable, to say the least, but I knew as soon as she started talking about the goo, as soon as I even saw it, that was why I was here. There was something to do with why the goo was there, I guess. That's why I was there. It was very interesting I stayed there for truly, it was probably years. I stayed with Jackie. We tried to figure things out. We investigated tunnels. She got me, scuba diving gear. She tried to give me a snorkel. And I said that would not help me going deep down. But thank you so much. But we worked with some of their scientists to get me scuba diving gear, I was like, yeah, so I need to be able to breathe. That's a thing I can't do underwater. It was honestly kind of fun to work with this world to create scuba diving gear, because supposedly when the water receded enough, they were going to lose their ability to go underwater, which is something that some of them dreaded. So there were some folks who, when the water started receding, just said they were never going to leave the water, because if they never leave the water, how are they gonna lose the ability? Because their legends talk of how when the time would come, they would step onto the land and they would have come out of the water and transformed for the last time. So some of them went, if I never go on land, I never lose ability. And I was like, okay. So to work with them to then be able to go back underwater, it is something that I was hoping they would then be able to keep with them. Adjust for as they need it. So while we were going in the water, we noticed that the goo was affecting the creatures in the water at a more rapid pace than the ones outside of the water. creatures as big as sharks and whales were beginning to leave goo behind as they swam through the water. And that was terrifying because it also meant that the people of that world were also leaving goo behind. The ones that chose to stay in the water and never go on to land. And the longer I stayed, the more this happened. The more time that passed, the more people and creatures got affected. The strange thing is even when the other people of the world were starting to leave goo behind as they walked, Jackie wasn't. Jackie seemed almost immune to the goo, and we were extremely confused. We worked with the doctors how we could to try and fix it. To try and figure out why was Jackie unaffected. But it didn't really work. Eventually it got to the point the doctors, even though it seemed like Jackie was immune, asked Jackie to pretty much stay away from anybody in case it was like a contamination issue. We were all very sure, me so more than anyone, that I couldn't catch it, carry it, any of that. And so I was going out. They had asked me to go retrieve this type of algae that was deep in a cave system. I got a map. I got everything I would need. There was no worry of it being an issue. No worry of there being any problem for me. It was just a time thing. And at the progression at which people were leaving goo behind, the scientists were trying to limit their movement, because when you moved, you left goo behind. So if you didn't move, you didn't leave goo behind. It sort of prolonged it. And they were hoping that this algae could help them come with a cure. So I got the algae, I brought it back to the scientist, and then I went back to Jackie's place. And when Jackie stood up, she left goo behind on the seat. And at this point, the entire planet was affected by the goo. There was not one creature that could be found besides myself that was not affected by this goo. So Jackie and I sat down and she talked all night, and I wrote pages of notes in my notebook. She told me about her first love, someone who she only met for a short time, who only was around for a short time. She told me all about them. How they were this tall, dark, and handsome energy. You know, that stereotypical storybook character. Tall, dark, and handsome. And they seemed to just show up one night out of nowhere. They seemed to come in the middle of the night when it was one of their holidays. It is the equivalent holiday for them that, like New Year, except for they don't categorize time in years per se. It is the cycles of their moon, which each cycle of their moon is like 6.5 to 7.5 months, somewhere in that range. And so that is the equivalent of like a year for them. They go by their moon cycles, so every moon. And so he showed up during their party of the moon. And it was this all-night event. And when he showed up, he stood at the edges. He didn't really interact until he made eye contact with Jackie. And she remembers meeting his gaze, and she told me about how the moment they made eye contact, she wanted to know him better. He had this sort of air about him that she gravitated towards. It was like a pull, she said, on her soul when they made eye contact. She knew that she wanted to be near this person. So, when a song came on, she got up the courage, she walked over, and she asked them to dance. And she says that the dance, in reality, lasted for several songs. For hours, the two of them danced. But for the two of them, or at least for Jackie, it felt like only minutes. She told me about how some of her friends that were watching around were mesmerized by their dancing. And just, they were also sort of like brought into this world that the two of them were in, sort of engulfed in that space where time passed so quickly. Or slowly, I guess. If it's taking moments or taking hours, that sort of thing. But slowly, the entire party sort of got engulfed with their dance. Other people stopped dancing around them and just watched. At one point, the music that was playing stopped, and everybody was just watching the two of them dance in what some of them recounted later was this mesmerizing movement that some of them swear they saw this sort of twist of magic around the two of them, this like sparkling energy sort of encasing them in this like beautiful dance that they were doing. And then when the night was over, the man vanished. And nobody knew where he came from, where he went. But what they did know, was that a few weeks later, a woman appeared, literally in thin air in front of them. She looked scared and panicked, and disappeared just as quickly. And they called those two the equivalent of angels. I cannot for the life of me pronounce the way that they said it, but the equivalent of angels, just this sort of otherworldly being that is powerful, that can just appear and disappear. But they viewed them, because of this man, as these gracious creatures from above, the equivalent of angels. So when I appeared, they assumed I was the same. That is why Jackie came and sat with me, why I got invited into her home, and she helped care for me and keep me safe while I was there, and all of that. That's why the scientists were so ready to work with me, is because they saw me as this sort of angel figure, and they assumed that I would be able to help solve this problem. And unfortunately, I couldn't. Jackie asked me to leave before everyone turned to goo. And I did. I didn't stick around when she asked me to leave. I respected that, because all of them wanted to try and fix it to the best of their ability on their own when they realized that I couldn't help. And it's a sad story. However, it is one that thrives on hope. The hope that they could solve it. The hope of help. The just generosity in such an awful situation that they were willing to give to a stranger. Because they could. And it is a beautiful story, even if it's sad. And with that, I will leave you this time, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.